Hi everyone! Today we'll be talking about the two first parts of the cellular respiration, glycolysis and pyruvate oxidation. So glycolysis is the first major step of cellular respiration, and you start off with a glucose molecule, and in the end you're going to end up with two pyruvic acids, or pyruvates, which are two 3-carbon sugars. And you're gonna, in the process, you'll be forming two ATPs and two NADHs. And remember, NADH is your electron carrier, which we're eventually going to use these in our electron transport chain. So I'm going to go through some of the basic information you should know about glycolysis. One big thing is it's just the first stage of breaking down sugars, taking one 6-carbon sugar and you're breaking it in half. This occurs in the cytosol, not the mitochondria. So this is happening outside of the mitochondria, which means that it can happen in both prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells because it doesn't depend on the mitochondria. It does not require oxygen, so this means that it's an anaerobic process. And the way it creates ATP is through something called substrate level phosphorylation. What that is this is kind of like a picture that shows it. You have an enzyme and it transfers a phosphate group from a substrate directly onto ADP. So it takes a phosphate group and it phosphorylates ADP, forming ATP. And so it's one way to create ATP. It shows the reactants and the products of glycolysis. We talked about how one glucose breaks down into two pyruvates, or two sugars with 3 carbons in them. You have two NAD pluses, which become reduced, which means they gain electrons, and they become NADH. So you get two NADHs. And then you have two ATPs that you actually have to spend for the reaction to work for glycolysis, but you actually gain 4 ATPs. So that means that you have a net production of 2 ATP. So you have products as 2 pyruvates, 2 ATP net, and then 2 NADH from glycolysis. The other important information for glycolysis, there's 10 steps, which you don't have to memorize, but you do need to know that there's 2 major phases for glycolysis. The first phase, which is steps 1 through 4, is called the energy investment phase, and that's where you're spending those 2 ATPs in order for the reactions to occur. So 2 ATPs are being used, as you can see here. But then the steps 5 through 10 is the energy payoff phase, where you're kind of getting more energy back. And this is where you produce 4 ATPs and 2 NADHs. These NADHs will go onto the electron transport chain, and then overall here on the bottom you can see that these are the products that we talked about. Okay, the next phase after glycolysis is your pyruvate oxidation, and this is a step that happens right before the citric acid cycle. You have your pyruvates, which you just created from glycolysis, which were floating in the cytosol. These pyruvates enter into the mitochondria through the mitochondrial matrix membrane, and the pyruvates then become oxidized. So this is just what we were just talking about. This picture here shows what's happening in pyruvate oxidation. You have the 2 pyruvates, and you're eventually going to form something called acetyl-CoA, and this is the product that will eventually go on to citric acid cycle. In this process, you're also going to be producing 2 more NADHs. So these are the electron carriers. And another byproduct is 2 carbon dioxides, 2 CO2s. Here's a table that just summarizes what we just talked about. And then for reactants, you had your 2 pyruvates, which also combined with 2 things called coenzyme A's. And this is what combined together to form your acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA is a 2-carbon molecule. So you go from 3 carbons to 2 carbons. That extra carbon that was lost is right here in your carbon dioxide. And so this is what's going to go on to your citric acid cycle. You should keep a mental tally of all of the products that are eventually being formed so that at the very end we could talk about what is our very starting reactant, which is just really glucose, and then what do we end up with at the very end of all of the cellular respiration. And so remember, so far in glycolysis, we produced 2 NADHs. Now here in pyruvate oxidation, we've produced another 2 NADHs. So far we're at a total of 4 NADH. And total between these two different steps that we've talked about, we've produced 2 net ATPs. Thanks so much.